12. Red Coast 2. Ye wasn't given a real job immediately after entering Red Coast Base. Under the watchful eyes of a security guard, she was only allowed to perform a few technical tasks. Back when she was still a second year in college, Ye had already known the professor who would end up being her thesis advisor. He had told Ye that to do astrophysics research, it was useless to excel at theory without knowledge of experimental methods and observational skills. At least, that was true in China. This was very different from her father's view, but Ye tended to agree with her professor. She had always felt that her father was too theoretical. Her advisor was one of the pioneers of Chinese radio astronomy. Under his influence, Ye developed a great interest in radio astronomy as well. Thus, she taught herself electrical engineering and computer science, the foundation for experiments and observations in the field. During the 2 years when she was a graduate student, the two of them had tested China's first small-scale radio telescope and had accumulated a great deal of experience in the area. She hadn't expected the knowledge would one day be useful at Red Coast Base. Eventually, Ye was assigned to the transmission department to maintain and repair equipment. She quickly became an indispensable part of their operations. Initially, this confused her a bit. She was the only person at the base who wasn't in a military uniform, and given her political status, everyone kept their distance. She had no way to ward off the loneliness other than devoting herself to work. However, this wasn't enough to explain why they relied on her so much. This was, after all, a key defense project. How could the technical staff here be so mediocre that she, who had not majored in engineering and who had no real working experience, easily took over their jobs? She learned the reason soon enough. Contrary to appearances, the base's staff was composed of the best technical officers from the 2nd Artillery Corps. She could study all her life and have no hope of catching up to those excellent electrical and computer engineers. But the base was remote, the conditions were poor, and the main research work of the Red Coast project was already completed. All that was left was maintenance and operation, so there was little opportunity for achieving any interesting technical results. Most people did not want to be indispensable because they understood that in highly classified projects like this, once someone was put into a core technical position, it would be very difficult for him to be transferred out. Thus, all of them tried to deliberately hide their technical competence as they went about their jobs. Yet they couldn't appear too incompetent, so if the supervisors said to go east, they would work hard to move west, purposely playing the fool. Their hope was to put the following thought into the supervisor's head. This man is working hard, but he's limited in his skills. There's no point in keeping him, because he'll only get in the way. Many really did successfully obtain transfers through this method. Under such conditions, Ye gradually became a key technician at the base. But the other reason that she could achieve this position puzzled her, and for that she could find no explanation. Red Coast Base, at least the parts that she had contact with, had no real advanced technology at all. Over time, as Ye continued to work at the transmission department, the restrictions on her were gradually relaxed, and even the security guard assigned to watch her was called off. She was allowed to touch most components of Red Coast's systems and could read the relevant technical documents. Of course, there were still areas forbidden to her. For example, she wasn't allowed near the computer control systems. However, Ye discovered that the impact of those systems on Red Coast was far smaller than she had imagined. For instance, the transmission department's computers consisted of 3 machines even more primitive than DJS-130. They used cumbersome magnetic core memory and paper input tape, and their longest uptime did not exceed 15 hours. She also saw that the precision of Red Coast's targeting system was very low, probably not even on par with that of an artillery cannon. One day, Commissar Lei came to speak with Ye. By this time, Yang Weining and Lei Zicheng had swapped places in her eyes. During those years, Young, as the highest-ranked technical officer, did not enjoy a high political status, and outside of technical matters he had little authority. He had to be careful with his subordinates and had to speak politely even to the sentries, lest he be deemed to have an intellectual's resistant attitude toward thought reform and collaboration with the masses. Thus, whenever he encountered difficulties in his work, Ye became his punching bag. But as Ye gained importance as a technical staff member, Commissar Lay gradually shed his initial rudeness and coldness and became kind toward her. Commissar Lay said,
"Wenxia, by now you're pretty familiar with the transmission system. This is also Red Coast's offensive component, its principal part. Can you give me your views of the system as a whole?"
They were sitting at the lip of the steep cliff on Radar Peak, the most secluded spot on the base. The cliff seemed to drop straight off into a bottomless abyss. At first, the spot had frightened Ye, but now she liked to come here by herself. Ye wasn't sure how to answer Commissar Lay's question. She was only responsible for maintaining and repairing equipment, and knew nothing about Red Coast as a whole, including its operation, targets, and so on. Indeed, she wasn't allowed to know. She wasn't even permitted to be present at the transmission. She pondered the question, began to speak, and stopped herself.
"Go ahead. Speak your mind,"
Commissar Lay said. He ripped out a blade of grass next to him and played with it absent-mindedly.
"It is just a radio transmitter." "That's right. Just a radio transmitter."
The commissar nodded, satisfied.
"Do you know about microwave ovens?"
Ye shook her head.
"They are a luxury plaything of the capitalist West. Food is heated by the energy generated from absorbing microwave radiation. At my previous research station, in order to precisely test the high-temperature aging of certain components, we imported one. After work, we would use it to warm manteau bread, bake a potato, that sort of thing. It's very interesting. The inside heats up first, while the outside remains cold."
Commissar Lay stood up and paced back and forth. He was so close to the edge of the cliff that it made Ye nervous.
"Red Coast is a microwave oven, and its heating targets are the enemy's space vessels. If we can apply microwave radiation at a specific power level of 1/10 of a watt to 1 watt per square centimeter, we'll be able to disable or destroy many electronic components of satellite communications, radar, and navigation systems."
Ye finally understood. Even though Red Coast was only a radio transmitter, that didn't mean it was conventional. The most surprising aspect was its transmission power, as high as 25 megawatts. This wasn't just more powerful than all communication transmissions, but also all radar transmissions. Red Coast relied on a set of gigantic capacitors. Because the power requirements were so high, the transmission circuits were also different from conventional designs. Ye now understood the purpose of such ultra-high power in the system, but something seemed wrong right away.
"The emission from the system seems to be modulated." "That's right. However, the modulation is unlike that used in conventional radio communications. The purpose isn't to add information, but to use shifting frequencies and amplitudes to penetrate possible shielding by the enemy. Of course, those are still experimental."
Ye nodded. Many of her questions had now been answered.
"Recently, 2 target satellites were launched from Jiquan. The test attacks by Red Coast were completely successful. Temperature inside the satellites reached nearly 1,000 degrees, and all instruments and photographic equipment on board were destroyed. In future wars, Red Coast can effectively strike at the enemy's communication and reconnaissance satellites, like the KH-8 spy satellites on which the American imperialists rely, as well as the KH-9, which are about to be launched. The lower orbit spy satellites of the Soviet revisionists are even more vulnerable. If necessary, we even have the capacity to destroy the Salyut space station of the Soviet revisionists and the Skylab station that American imperialists plan on launching next year."
"Commissar, what are you telling her?" Someone spoke behind Ye. She turned and saw that it was Yang Wei-ning, who stared at Commissar Lei severely.
This is for work,"
Commissar Lei said, and then left. Yang glanced at Ye without saying anything and followed Lei. Ye was left all by herself. "He's the one who brought me here, but he still doesn't trust me," a disconsolate Ye thought. She was worried about Commissar Lei. At the base, Lei had more authority than Yang. Since the Commissar had the final vote on most important matters, but the way he rushed away with Yang seemed to indicate that he felt the chief engineer had caught him doing something wrong. This convinced Ye that Lei had made a personal decision to tell her about the true purpose of the Red Coast project. "What will happen to him as a result of this decision?" As she gazed at Commissar Lei's burly back, Ye felt a wave of gratitude. For her, trust was a luxury that she dared not wish for. Compared to Yang, Lei was closer to her image of a real military officer, possessing a soldier's frank and forthright manners. Yang, on the other hand, was nothing more than a typical intellectual of the period, cautious, timid, seeking only to protect himself. Even though Ye understood him, the wide gulf already between them grew wider. The next day, Ye was transferred out of the transmission department and assigned to the monitoring department. At first she thought this was related to the events of the day before, an attempt to move her away from the core of Red Coast. But after arriving at the monitoring department, she realized that this was more like the heart of Red Coast. Even though the two departments shared some resources, such as the antenna, the technology level of the monitoring department was far more advanced. The monitoring department had a very sophisticated and sensitive radio receiver. A ruby-based traveling wave maser amplified the signals received by the gigantic antenna, and in order to minimize interference, the core of the reception system was immersed in liquid helium at negative 269 degrees Celsius. Periodically, a helicopter came to replenish the supply of liquid helium. The reception system was thus capable of picking up very faint signals. Ye couldn't help but imagine how wonderful it would be to use the equipment for radio astronomy research. The monitoring department's computer system was also much bigger and more complex than the one at the transmission department. The first time she entered the main computer room, Ye saw a row of cathode ray tube displays. She was stunned to see programming code scrolling across each of them, and the operators were free to edit and test the code using the keyboard. When she learned programming in college, the source code was always written on the grids of special programming paper, then transferred to paper tape using a typewriter. She had heard of input using a keyboard and screen, but this was the first time she had seen it. The software available astonished her even more. She learned about something called Fortran, which allowed you to program using a language close to natural language. You could even type mathematical equations directly into the code. Programming in it was several times more efficient than programming in machine code. And then there was something called a database, which allowed for easy storage and manipulation of vast amounts of data. 2 days later, Commissar Lei sought Ye out for another talk. This time they were in the main computer room of the monitoring department, in front of the row of green glowing screens. Yang Wei-ning sat close by, not part of their conversation, but also not willing to leave, which made Ye very uncomfortable.
"Wenxia,"
Commissar Lei began,
"let me explain the work of the monitoring department to you. Simply put, the goal is to keep an eye on enemy activities in space, including intercepting communications between enemy space vessels and the ground, and between the space vessels themselves, collaborating with our telemetry, tracking, and command centers to determine the orbits of enemy space vessels and provide data for Red Coast's combat systems." In other words, the eyes of Red Coast are here."
Yang interrupted.
"Commissar Lay, I don't think what you're doing is a good idea. There's no need to tell her these things."
Ya glanced at Yang and anxiously said,
"Commissar, if it's not appropriate for me to know, then—"
No, Wenxia."
The commissar held up a hand to stop Ye from speaking. He turned to Yang.
"Chief Yang, I'm going to tell you the same thing I did before. This is for work. For Wenxia to perform her duties better, she must be told the purpose of her work."
Yang stood up.
"I will report this to our superiors."
"That is your right, of course. But do not fret, Chief Yang. I will assume responsibility for all consequences."
Yang got up and left with a bitter expression.
"Don't mind him. That's just the way Chief Yang is."
Commissar Lay chuckled and shook his head. Then he stared at Ye, and his tone became solemn.
"Wenxia, when we first brought you to the base, the goal was simple. Red Coast's monitoring systems often had interference caused by electromagnetic radiation from solar flares and sunspots. Fortuitously, we saw your paper and realized that you had researched solar activity. Among Chinese scholars, your predictive model turned out to be the most accurate, so we wanted to ask for your help in solving this problem. But after you came, you showed very strong abilities, so we decided to give you more responsibilities. My thought was this: assign you first to the transmission department, then the monitoring department. This way you'd gain a comprehensive understanding of Red Coast as a whole, and we could wait and see where to assign you after that. Of course, as you can see, this plan is met with some resistance, but I have trust in you, Wenxia. Let me be clear. Until now, the trust placed in you has been mine, personally. I hope that you can continue to work hard and earn the trust of the organization as a whole."
Commissar Lay placed a hand on Ye's shoulder. She felt the warmth and strength conveyed through it.
"Wenxia, let me tell you my sincere hope. One day, I'd like to call you Comrade Ye."
Lay stood up and strode away in the confident manner of a soldier. Ye's eyes were filled with tears. Seen through them, the code on the screen became flickering flames. This was the first time she had cried since the death of her father. As Ye familiarized herself with the work of the monitoring department, she discovered that she was far less successful here than at the transmission department. The computer science knowledge she had was outdated, and she had to learn the software techniques from scratch. Even though Commissar Lay trusted her, the restrictions on her were severe. She was allowed to view the software source code, for example, but was forbidden from touching the database. On a day-to-day basis, Ye was mainly supervised by Yang. He became even ruder to her and would get angry at her for the smallest things. Commissar Lay talked to him about it multiple times without effect. It seemed that Yang became filled with a nameless anxiety as soon as he saw Ye. Gradually, as Ye encountered more and more unexplainable matters in her work, she came to realize that the Red Coast project was far more complex than she had imagined. One day, the monitoring system intercepted a transmission that, after being deciphered by the computer, turned out to be a few satellite photographs. The blurry images were sent to the General Staff Department's Surveying and Mapping Bureau for interpretation. They turned out to be images of important military targets in China, including the naval harbor at Qingdao and several key factories of the Third Front program. Analysis confirmed that these images came from the KH-9 American reconnaissance system. The first KH-9 satellite had just been launched. Although it mainly relied on recoverable film capsules for intelligence gathering, it was also being used to test out the more advanced technique of radio transmission of digital images. Due to the technology's immaturity, the satellite transmitted at a low frequency, which increased its range of reception sufficiently for it to be intercepted by Red Coast, And because it was only a test, the encryption was not very secure and could be broken. The KH-9 was without a doubt an important monitoring target, as it presented a rare opportunity to gather more information about American satellite reconnaissance systems. Yet, after the third day, Yang Weining ordered a change in the frequency and direction of monitoring and abandoned the target. Ya found the decision incomprehensible. Another event also shocked her. Even though she was now in the monitoring department, sometimes the transmission department still needed her. One time, she accidentally saw the frequency settings for a few upcoming transmissions. She discovered that the designated frequencies for transmissions 304, 318, and 325 were lower than microwave range and could not result in any heating effect in the target. One day, an officer summoned Ya to the main base administrative office out of the blue. From the officer's tone and expression, Ya knew that something had gone wrong. As she walked into the office, the scene before seemed familiar. All the senior officers of the base were present, along with 2 officers she didn't know. However, she could tell at a glance that they were from higher up in the chain of command. Everyone's icy stares focused on her, but the sensitivity she had developed over the stormy years informed her that she wasn't the one in big trouble today. She was, at most, a sideshow. She saw Commissar Lay sitting in a corner with a dejected look.
He is finally going to pay for trusting me,
she thought. At once she decided that she would do whatever she could to save him. She would take responsibility for everything, even lie if necessary. But Commissar Lay was the first to speak, and what he said was completely unexpected.
"Yeah, Wincia, I must make it clear at the start that I do not agree with what is about to be done. The decision was made by Chief Engineer Young, after requesting instructions from our superiors. He alone will be responsible for all consequences."
Commissar Lay turned to look at Young, who nodded solemnly. Lay continued.
"In order to better utilize your skills at Red Coast Base, Chief Engineer Young repeatedly requested permission from our superiors to abandon the cover story we've been using with you. Our comrades from the Army Political Department," he indicated the 2 officers Ya didn't know, "were sent to investigate your work situation. Finally, with the approval of our superiors, we've decided to inform you of the true nature of the Red Coast project."
Only after a long pause did Ya finally understand Commissar Lay's meaning. He had been lying to her all along.
"I hope you will treasure this opportunity and work hard to redeem your sins. After this, you must behave with the utmost propriety. Any reactionary behavior will be severely punished."
Commissar Lay stared at Ya. He was a completely different person from the image Ya had formed of him.
"Are we clear? Good. Now Chief Yang can explain."
The others left, leaving only Yang and Ya.
"If you don't want this, there's still time."
Ya discerned the weight behind these words. She now understood Yang's anxiety whenever he had seen her the last few weeks. To make full use of her skills, it was necessary for her to know the truth about Red Coast. However, this choice would extinguish the last ray of hope she had of ever leaving Radar Peak. Once she said yes, she really would spend the rest of her life at Red Coast Base.
"I agree,"
Ya said, softly but resolutely. Thus, on this early summer evening, as the wind howled through the giant parabolic antenna, and as the forest rustled over the greater Khingan Mountains in the distance, Yang Weining explained to Ya Wenxia the true nature of Red Coast. It was a fairy tale for the ages, even more incredible than the Commissar's lies. 13. Red Coast 3. Selected documents from the Red Coast Project. These documents were declassified 3 years after Ye Wenxia told Wang Miao the inside story of Red Coast and provide background information for what she told him. 1. A question largely ignored by trends in fundamental world scientific research. Originally published in Internal Reference, XX/XX/196X. Abstract. Based on modern and contemporary history, there are 2 ways in which the results of fundamental scientific research can be converted into practical applications: gradualistic mode and saltatory mode. Gradualistic mode. Theoretical fundamental results are gradually applied to technology. Advances accumulate until they reach a breakthrough. Recent examples include the development of space technology. Saltatory mode. Theoretical fundamental results rapidly become applied technology, leading to a technological leap. Recent examples include the appearance of atomic weapons. Until the 40s, some of the foremost physicists still thought it would never be possible to release the energy of the atom. But atomic weapons then appeared within a very short period. We define a technology leap to occur when fundamental science is converted to applied technology across a great span in an extremely brief time interval. Currently, both NATO and the Warsaw Pact are intensely active in fundamental research and investing heavily in it. One or more technological leaps can occur at any time. Such an occurrence will pose a major threat to our strategic planning. This article argues that our focus is currently on the gradualistic mode of technology development, and insufficient attention is paid to the possibility of technology leaps. Starting from a higher vantage point, we should develop a comprehensive strategy and set of principles so that we can respond appropriately when technological leaps occur. Fields where technological leaps are most likely: physics, omitted; biology, omitted; computer science, omitted; the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. Of all fields, this is the one in which the possibility for a technology leap is greatest. If a leap occurs in this field, the impact will exceed the sum of technology leaps in the other 3 fields. Full text omitted. Instructions from central leadership. Distribute this article to appropriate personnel and organize discussion groups. The article's views will not be to the liking of some, but let's not rush to label the author. The key is to appreciate the author's long-term thinking. Some comrades cannot see beyond the ends of their noses, possibly because of the greater political environment, possibly because of their arrogance. This is not good. Strategic blind spots are extremely dangerous. In my view, of the 4 fields where technology leaps may occur, we have given the least thought to the last one. It's worth some attention, and we should systematically analyze the matter in depth. Signed, XXX. Date, XX/XX/196X. 2. Research report on the possibility of technology leap due to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. 1. Current international research trends. Summary. 1. The United States and other NATO states. The scientific case and the necessity for SETI are generally accepted, and strong academic support exists. Project Ozma. In 1960, the National Radio Astronomy Observatory at Green Bank, West Virginia, searched for extraterrestrial intelligence with a radio telescope 26 meters in diameter. The project examined the stars Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani for 200 hours using ranges near the 1.420 gigahertz frequency. Project Ozma 2, which will involve more targets and a broader frequency range, is planned for 1972. Probes. The Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 probes, each of which will carry a metal plaque containing information about civilization on Earth, are scheduled for launch in 1972. The Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 probes, each of which will carry a metal audio record, are scheduled for launch in 1977. The Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, Constructed in 1963, this is an important instrument for SETI. Its effective energy collection area is about 20 acres, which is greater than the sum of the collecting areas of all other radio telescopes in the world. When combined with its computer system, it can simultaneously monitor 65,000 channels and is also capable of ultra-high energy transmissions. 2. The Soviet Union. Few sources of intelligence are available, but there are indications that large investments have been made in the field. Compared to NATO countries, the research seems to be more systematic and long-term. Based on certain isolated information channels, plans are currently underway to build a global-scale, very long baseline interferometry (VLBI) aperture synthesis radio telescope system. Once the system is completed, it will possess the world's most powerful deep space exploration capabilities. 2. Preliminary analysis of social patterns of extraterrestrial civilizations using a materialist conception of history. Omitted. 3. Preliminary analysis of the influence of extraterrestrial civilizations on human social and political trends. Omitted. 4. Preliminary analysis of the influence on current international patterns due to possible contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. 1. Unidirectional contact. Only receiving messages sent by extraterrestrial intelligence. Omitted. 2. Bidirectional contact. Exchange of messages with extraterrestrial intelligence and direct contact. Omitted. 5. The danger and consequences of superpowers making initial contact with extraterrestrial intelligence and monopolizing such contact. 1. Analysis of consequences of American imperialists and NATO making initial contact with extraterrestrial intelligence and monopolizing such contact. Still classified. 2. Analysis of consequences of Soviet revisionists and Warsaw Pact making initial contact with extraterrestrial intelligence and monopolizing such contact. Still classified. Instructions from Central Leadership. Others have already sent their messages out into space. It's dangerous if extraterrestrials only hear their voices. We should speak up as well. Only then will they get a complete picture of human society. It's not possible to get the truth by only listening to one side. We must make this happen, and quickly. Signed, XXX. Date, XX/XX/196X. 3. Research report on the initial phase of the Red Coast Project. XX/XX/196X. Top secret. Number of copies, 2. Summary document. Central document number XXXXXX, forwarded to the Commission for Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and the Central Planning Commission, Department of National Defense. Disseminated at the XXXXXX Conference and the XXXXXX Conference. Partially disseminated at the XXXXXX Conference. Topic serial number 3760. Codename, Red Coast. 1. Goal, summary. To search for the possible existence of extraterrestrial intelligence and to attempt contact and exchange. 2. Theoretical study of the Red Coast Project. 1. Searching and monitoring. Monitoring frequency range, 1,000 MHz to 40,000 MHz. Monitoring channels, 15,000. Key frequencies to monitor. Hydrogen atom frequency at 1,420 MHz. Hydroxyl radical radiation frequency at 1,667 MHz. Water molecule radiation frequency at 22,000 MHz. Monitoring target range, a sphere centered around Earth with a radius of 1,000 light-years, containing approximately 20 million stars. For a list of targets, please see Appendix 1. 2. Message transmission. Transmission frequencies, 2,800 MHz, 12,000 MHz, 22,000 MHz. Transmission power, 10 to 25 megawatts. Transmission targets, a sphere centered around Earth with a radius of 200 light-years, containing approximately 100,000 stars. For a list of targets, please see Appendix 2. 3. Development of the Red Coast Self-Interpreting Code System. Guiding Principle. Using universal, basic mathematical and physical laws, construct an elemental linguistic code that can be understood by any civilization that has mastered basic algebra, Euclidean geometry, and the laws of classical mechanics, non-relativistic physics. Using the elemental code above and supplemented with low-resolution images, gradually build up to a full linguistic system. Languages supported: Chinese and Esperanto. The entire system's information content should be 680 kilobytes. Transmission times at the 2,800 MHz, 12,000 MHz, and 22,000 MHz channels are 1,183 minutes, 224 minutes, and 132 minutes, respectively. 3. Implementation plan for the Red Coast project. 1. Preliminary design for the Red Coast monitoring and searching system, still classified. 2. Preliminary design for the Red Coast transmission system, still classified. 3. Preliminary site selection plan for Red Coast Base, omitted. 4. Preliminary thoughts on the formation of Red Coast Force from within the 2nd Artillery Corps, still classified. 4. Content of message transmitted by Red Coast. Summary. Overview of Earth, 3.1 kilobytes. Overview of life on Earth, 4.4 kilobytes. Overview of human society, 4.6 kilobytes. Basic world history, 5.4 kilobytes. Total information content, 17.5 kilobytes. The entire message will be sent after transmitting the self-interpreting code system. Transmission times of message at the 2,800 MHz, 12,000 MHz, and 22,000 MHz channels are 31 minutes, 7.5 minutes, and 3.5 minutes, respectively. The message will be carefully vetted by a multidisciplinary review to ensure that it will not give away the Earth's coordinates relative to the Milky Way. Among the 3 channels, transmission at the higher frequency 12,000 MHz and 22,000 MHz channels should be minimized to reduce the likelihood that the source of transmission may be precisely ascertained. 4. Message to extraterrestrial civilizations. First draft. Complete text. Attention, you who have received this message. This message was sent out by a country that represents revolutionary justice on Earth. Before this, you may have already received other messages sent from the same direction. Those messages were sent by an imperialist superpower on this planet. That superpower is struggling against another superpower for world domination so that it can drag human history backwards. We hope you will not listen to their lies. Stand with justice. Stand with the revolution. Instructions from Central Leadership. This is utter crap. It's enough to put up big character posters everywhere on the ground, but we should not send them into space. The Cultural Revolution leadership should no longer have any involvement with Red Coast. Such an important message must be composed carefully. It's probably best to have it drafted by a special committee and then discussed and approved by a meeting of the Politburo. Signed, XXX. Date XX/XX/196X. Second draft, omitted. Third draft, omitted. Fourth draft, complete text. We extend our best wishes to you, inhabitants of another world. After reading the following message, you should have a basic understanding of civilization on Earth. By dint of long toil and creativity, the human race has built a splendid civilization, blossoming with a multitude of diverse cultures. We have also begun to understand the laws governing the natural world and the development of human societies. We cherish all that we have accomplished. But our world is still flawed. Hate exists, as does prejudice and war. Because of conflicts between the forces of production and the relations of production, wealth distribution is extremely uneven, and large portions of humanity live in poverty and misery. Human societies are working hard to resolve the difficulties and problems they face, striving to create a better future for Earth civilization. The country that sent this message is engaged in this effort. We are dedicated to building an ideal society where the labor and value of every member of the human race are fully respected, where everyone's material and spiritual needs are fully met, so that civilization on Earth may become more perfect. With the best of intentions, we look forward to establishing contact with other civilized societies in the universe. We look forward to working together with you to build a better life in this vast universe. 5. Related policies and strategies. 1. Consideration of policies and strategies after reception of message from extraterrestrial intelligence. Omitted. 2. Consideration of policies and strategies after establishing contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Omitted. Instructions from central leadership. It's important to take the time out of our busy schedules to do something entirely unrelated to our immediate needs. This project has allowed us to give some thought to issues we've never had time for. Indeed, we can think through them only when we take a sufficiently high vantage point. This alone is enough to justify the Red Coast project. How wonderful it will be if the universe really contains other intelligences and other societies. Bystanders have the clearest view. Someone truly neutral will then be able to comment on whether we're the heroes or villains of history. Signed, XXX. Date, XX/XX/196X. 14. Red Coast 4.
Professor Ye?
Wang Miao said.
I have a question. Back then, SETI was marginalized research. Why did the Red Coast project have such a high security rating?
That question was asked during the very first phases of the Red Coast project, and continued to be asked until the end. But now you should know the answer. We can only be impressed by the foresight of the top decision-maker responsible for the Red Coast project. Yes, he thought far ahead.
Wang nodded gravely. Wang knew that it was only within the last couple of years that serious and systematic consideration had been given to the question of how and to what degree human societies would be influenced by establishing contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. But the research had rapidly gained interest, and the conclusions were shocking. Naive, idealistic hopes had been shattered. Scholars found that, contrary to the happy wishes of most people, it was not a good idea for the human race as a whole to make contact with extraterrestrials. The impact of such contact on human society would be divisive rather than uniting, and would exacerbate rather than mitigate the conflicts between different cultures. In summary, if contact were to occur, the internal divisions within Earth civilization would be magnified and likely lead to disaster. The most shocking conclusion of all was that the impact would have nothing at all to do with the degree and type of contact, unidirectional or bidirectional, or the form and degree of advancement of the alien civilization. This was the theory of contact as symbol proposed by sociologist Bill Mathers of Rand Corporation in his book The 100,000 Light-Year Iron Curtain, SETI Sociology. Mathers believed that contact with an alien civilization is only a symbol or a switch. Regardless of the content of the encounter, the results would be the same. Suppose that the nature of the contact is such that only the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence is confirmed, with no other substantive information, what Mathers called elementary contact. The impact would be magnified by the lens of human mass psychology and culture until it resulted in huge substantive influences on the progress of civilization. If such contact were monopolized by one country or political force, the significance would be comparable to an overwhelming advantage in economic and military power.
How did Red Coast end? You can probably guess.
Wang nodded again. Of course, he understood that had Red Coast succeeded, the world today would be very different. To comfort Ye, he said,
"It's still too early to tell if it succeeded or not. The radio waves sent out by Red Coast haven't gone very far in the universe yet."
Ye shook her head.
"The farther the signals travel, the weaker they become, and the less likely that any extraterrestrial civilization will receive them. Of course, if aliens have already detected the Earth's existence and its oxygen-rich atmosphere and decided to focus powerful equipment specifically at us, the story would be different. But in general, research shows that in order for extraterrestrials to detect our signals, we must broadcast at a power level equal to the energy output of a mid-sized star. Soviet astrophysicist Nikolai Kardashev once proposed that civilizations can be divided into 3 types based on the power they can command. For communication purposes, let's say. A Type 1 civilization can muster an amount of energy equivalent to the total energy output of the Earth. Based on his estimates, the energy output of the Earth is about 10 to the 15th power to 10 to the 16th power watts. A Type 2 civilization can marshal the energy equivalent to the output of a typical star, 10 to the 26th power watts. A Type 3 civilization's communication energy can reach 10 to the 36th power watts, approximately equal to the energy output of a galaxy. Civilization on Earth is currently about a Type 0.7, not even a full Type 1. And the transmissions from Red Coast used only about 1/10,000,000th of the amount of power the Earth could muster. Our call was like the buzzing of a mosquito in the sky. No one could hear it. But if Kardashev's Type 2 and Type 3 civilizations really exist, we should be able to hear them. We never heard anything during the 20 years that Red Coast was in operation. Indeed, given Red Coast and SETI, could all our efforts ultimately have proven only one thing? In the entire universe, only the Earth has intelligent life?
Ye gave a light sigh.
Theoretically, there may never be a definitive answer to that question. But my sense, and the sense of everyone who went through Red Coast, is that that is the case. It's too bad that Red Coast was decommissioned. Once it was built, it should have been kept running. It was a truly great enterprise. Red Coast's decline was gradual. At the beginning of the 80s, there was a large-scale renovation. Mainly the transmission and monitoring computer systems were partially upgraded. The transmission system was automated, and the monitoring system incorporated 2 IBM mini-computers. The data processing capability became far more advanced, and it was able to simultaneously monitor 40,000 channels. But later, as people gained perspective, they had a better appreciation of the difficulty of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and the leadership lost interest in Red Coast. The first change was reducing the base's security rating. The consensus was that the extreme secrecy around Red Coast was unnecessary, and the security detail at the base was reduced from a company to a squad, until eventually only a group of 5 security guards were left. Also, after that renovation, although Red Coast remained administratively within the 2nd Artillery Corps, management of its scientific activities was turned over to the Chinese Academy of Sciences Astronomy Institute, and it took on some research projects that had nothing to do with the search for extraterrestrial intelligence or the military. I believe you achieved most of your scientific accomplishments during that time. Initially, Red Coast also took on some radio astronomy projects. At the time, it was the largest radio telescope in the country. Later, as other radio astronomy observatories were built, Red Coast's research turned to the observation and analysis of solar electromagnetic activity. For this, they added a solar telescope. The mathematical model we built for solar electromagnetic activity was at the forefront of the field back then, and had many practical applications. With these later research results, the large amount invested in Red Coast had at least a little return. Actually, much of the credit should be given to Commissar Lay. Of course, he had his own agenda. He realized that as a political officer in a technical unit, his future wasn't bright. Before joining the army, he had studied astrophysics as well, so he wanted to return to doing science. The research projects that Red Coast took on outside of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence were all due to his efforts. I doubt that he could have returned to technical work so easily after spending so much time as a political commissar. Back then, you still hadn't been politically rehabilitated. It looks to me like all he did was to put his name on your research results.
Yeah smiled forgivingly.
Without Lay, Red Coast Base would have been finished even earlier. After Red Coast was designated for conversion to civilian use, the military basically abandoned it. Eventually, the Chinese Academy of Sciences couldn't maintain the funds necessary for Red Coast's operation, and it was shut down.
Yeah didn't talk much about her daily life at Red Coast Base, and Wong didn't ask. 4 years after entering the base, she married young Weining. Everything just happened naturally, without any drama. Later, an accident at the base killed both Yang and Lei, and Yang Dong was born after her father's death. The mother and daughter only left Radar Peak in the mid-'80s, when Red Coast Base was finally decommissioned. Yeah later returned to Tsinghua, her alma mater, to teach astrophysics until retirement. All this Wong had heard from Xia Ruishan at the Miyun Radio Astronomy Observatory.
The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is a unique discipline. It has a profound influence on the researcher's perspective on life.
Yeah spoke in a drawn-out voice, as though telling stories to a child.
In the dead of the night, I could hear in my headphones the lifeless noise of the universe. The noise was faint, but constant, more eternal than the stars. Sometimes I thought it sounded like the endless winter winds of the greater Khingan Mountains. I felt so cold then, and the loneliness was indescribable. From time to time, I would gaze up at the stars after a night shift and think that they looked like a glowing desert, and I myself was a poor child abandoned in the desert. I thought that life was truly an accident among accidents in the universe. The universe was an empty palace, and humankind the only ant in the entire palace. This kind of thinking infused the second half of my life with a conflicted mentality. Sometimes I thought life was precious, and everything was so important, but other times I thought humans were insignificant, and nothing was worthwhile. Anyway, my life passed day after day, accompanied by this strange feeling, and before I knew it, I was old.
Wong wanted to comfort this old woman who had devoted her life to a lonely but great enterprise, but Ye's last speech caused him to sink into the same sorrowful mood. He found that he had nothing to say except,
"Professor Ye, someday I'll go with you to visit the ruins of Red Coast Base."
Ye slowly shook her head.
"Xiao Wang, I'm not like you. I'm getting on in years, and my health isn't what it used to be. It's hard to predict the future. I live my life day to day."
Looking at the silvery head of hair on Ye Wenxie, Wang knew she was thinking of her daughter again. 15. 3body, Copernicus, Universal Football, and Tri-Solar Day. After leaving Ye's home, Wang Miao couldn't calm down. The events of the last 2 days and the history of Red Coast, two seemingly unconnected strands, now twisted together, made the world unfamiliar overnight. Once he was home, in order to escape this mood, Wong turned on the computer, put on the V-suit, and logged on to 3body for the third time. The attempt to adjust his state of mind worked. By the time the login screen appeared, Wong seemed like a different person, one filled with an unexplainable excitement. Unlike the first two times, this time Wong came with a purpose. He was going to reveal the secret of the world of 3body. He created a new login ID appropriate for his new role, Copernicus. Once logged in, Wong again stood on that broad, desolate plain, facing the strange dawn of the world of 3body. A colossal pyramid appeared in the east, but right away Wong knew it was no longer the pyramid of King Zhou of Shang, or Mozi. It had a Gothic-style apex, stabbing straight into the morning sky, recalling St. Joseph's Church at Wang Fuxing. But if that church were placed next to this pyramid, it would be nothing more than an entrance booth. He saw many buildings in the distance that were apparently dehydratories, but also now built in the Gothic style, with tall, sharp steeples, as though the ground had grown numerous spikes. Wong saw a door on the side of the pyramid, lit from within by flickering lights. He walked over. Inside the tunnel was a row of statues of the gods of Olympus holding up torches, their surfaces blackened by smoke. He entered the great hall and saw that it was even dimmer than the entrance tunnel. 2 silver candelabra on top of a long marble table provided a drowsy light. Several men were seated around the table. The dim light allowed Wong to see only the outlines of their faces. Their eyes were hidden in the shadows of their deep eye sockets, but Wong could still feel their gazes focusing on him. The men seemed to be dressed in medieval robes. On closer examination, 1 or 2 of them had simpler robes, more like classical Greek chitons. At one end of the table was a thin, tall man. The golden crown on top of his head was the only thing that glittered in the great hall, other than the candles. With some effort, Wong saw by the dim candlelight that his robe was different from the others. It was red. Wong realized that the game displayed a distinct world for each player. This world, based on the European High Middle Ages, was chosen by the software based on his ID.
"You're late. The meeting has been going on for a while,"
the gold-crowned, red-robed man said.
"I'm Pope Gregory."
Wong tried to recall what little he knew of European history in the Middle Ages, so that he could deduce the level of advancement of this civilization based on the name. But then he remembered how wildly anachronistic historical references could be in the world of 3body, and decided the effort wasn't worth it.
I'm Aristotle. You changed your ID, but we all recognize you. In the previous 2 civilizations, you traveled to the east.
The speaker was the man with the Greek chiton. He had a head of white curls.
Yes.
Wong nodded.
There I witnessed the destruction of 2 civilizations, one by extreme cold, another by a blazing sun. I also saw the great efforts the scholars of the East expended in trying to master the laws governing the sun's motion.
Ha! The sound came from a man with a goatee that curled upward. He was even thinner than the Pope. Eastern scholars tried to understand the secrets of the sun's motion through meditation, epiphany, or even dreams. Utterly laughable.
This is Galileo,
said Aristotle.
He advocates understanding the world through observation and experiment. He is an unimaginative thinker, but his results demand our attention. Mozi also conducted experiments and observation,
Wong said. Galileo snorted. Mozi's way of thinking was still Eastern. He was nothing more than a mystic dressed as a scientist. He never took his own observation data seriously, and he constructed his model based on subjective speculation. Ridiculous. I feel sorry for his refined equipment. We're different. Based on large amounts of observational data and experiments, we make strict, logical deductions to build a model of the universe. Then we go back to experimentation and observation to test it.
That's correct.
Wang nodded.
That's also my way of thinking.
Have you brought a calendar as well, then?
The Pope's tone was mocking.
I don't have a calendar. I only brought a model built upon observation data. But I must make it clear that even if the model is correct, it's not certain that by using it one can master the precise details of the sun's motion and create a calendar. However, it's a necessary step.
A few lonely claps echoed throughout the great hall. The applause came from Galileo. Excellent, Copernicus. Excellent. Your pragmatic way of thinking, adapted to the experimental scientific approach, is lacking in most scholars. Based on this alone, your theory is worth listening to. The Pope nodded at Wang.
Go ahead.
After calming himself and walking to the other end of the long table, Wang said,
It's actually pretty simple. The reason why the sun's motion seems patternless is because our world has 3 suns. Under the influence of their mutually perturbing gravitational attraction, their movements are unpredictable. The 3-body problem. When our planet revolves around one of the suns in a stable orbit, that's a stable era. When one or more of the other suns move within a certain distance, their gravitational pull will snatch the planet away from the sun it's orbiting, causing it to wander unstably through the gravitational fields of the 3 suns. That's a chaotic era. After an uncertain amount of time, our planet is once again pulled into a temporary orbit and another stable era begins. This is a football game at the scale of the universe. The players are the 3 suns, and our planet is the football.
A few hollow laughs rang out in the great hall.
Burn him to death,
the Pope said impassively. The 2 soldiers standing at the door in rusty armor started toward Wang like 2 clumsy robots. Burn him, Galileo sighed. I had hopes for you, but you're nothing more than another mystic or warlock.
Such men are a public nuisance,
Aristotle agreed.
At least let me finish.
Wang shoved away the iron gauntlets of the 2 soldiers. Have you seen 3 suns, or know anyone who has? Galileo asked.
Everyone has seen them.
Then, other than the sun that appears during chaotic eras and stable eras, where are the other 2?
The sun that we see at different times may not be the same. It's only one of the 3 suns. When the other 2 are far away, they look like flying stars.
You lack basic scientific training, Galileo said, shaking his head. The sun must move continuously to a distant spot. It cannot jump over the intervening space. According to your hypothesis, there should be another observable situation. The sun must get smaller than it usually appears, but bigger than a flying star, and gradually shrink into a flying star as it moves farther away. But we've never seen the sun behave that way.
Since you have scientific training, you ought to have some knowledge of the sun's structure.
That's my proudest discovery. The sun is made of a sparse but expansive gaseous outer layer and a dense and hot inner core.
Very true, said Wang. But you apparently haven't discovered the special optical interaction between the sun's gaseous outer layer and our planet's atmosphere. It's a phenomenon akin to polarization or destructive interference. As a result, when we view the sun from within our atmosphere and it gets a certain distance from us, the gaseous outer layer suddenly becomes completely transparent and invisible, and all we can see is its bright inner core. The sun then appears to be only the size of the inner core, a flying star. This phenomenon has confused every researcher and every civilization throughout history, and prevented them from discovering the existence of the 3 suns. Now you understand why the appearance of 3 flying stars heralds a long period of extreme cold, because all 3 suns are far away.
A brief silence followed as everyone pondered this. Aristotle was the first to speak.
You lack basic training in logic. It's true that we can sometimes see 3 flying stars, and that's always accompanied by destructive periods of extreme cold. But based on your theory, we should also sometimes see 3 normal-sized suns in the sky. This has never happened. In all the records of all the civilizations, this has never occurred.
Wait! A man wearing a strangely shaped hat and a long beard stood up and spoke for the first time. I'm Leonardo da Vinci. There may be such historical records. One civilization saw 2 suns and was immediately destroyed by their combined heat, but the record was very vague. We're talking about 3 suns, not 2, Galileo shouted. According to his theory, 3 suns must appear sometime, just like 3 flying stars.
3 suns have appeared,
Wang said, utterly calm.
and people have seen them. But those who saw such a great sight could not leave behind any information about them, because seeing 3 suns would mean that they had at most a few seconds left to live. They had no chance to escape or survive. Trisolar days are the most terrifying catastrophes for our world. On such days, the surface of the planet would turn into a smelting furnace in a second, and the heat would be enough to melt rocks. After the destruction caused by a trisolar day, an eon would pass before the reappearance of life and civilization. This is yet another reason why there's no historical record of them.
Silence. Everyone stared at the Pope.
Burn him,
The Pope said gently. The smile on his face was a little familiar to Wang. The smile of King Zhou of Shang. The great hall came alive, and everyone seemed to be preparing for a celebration. Galileo and some others joyfully carried a stake out of a dark corner. They pulled off the charcoal black body still tied to the stake and cast it aside before fastening it in an upright position. Another group happily piled firewood around the stake. Only Leonardo ignored the commotion. He sat at the table, pondering, and occasionally using a pen to calculate something on the table.
Giordano Bruno,
Aristotle said, pointing at the blackened body.
like you, he came here and spewed nonsense.
use a low fire.
The Pope said, his voice weak. 2 soldiers started to tie Wang Miao to the stake using asbestos ropes. Wang used the hand that was still free to point at the Pope.
You are nothing more than a program. As for the rest of you, you're either programs or idiots. I will log back on.
You cannot return. You will disappear forever from the world of 3body. Galileo cackled.
Then you must be a program. A normal person would certainly understand the basics of the internet. The most the game can do is record my MAC address. I can just switch computers and create a new ID. I'll announce myself when I'm back.
The system has recorded your retinal scan through the V-suit, Leonardo said, looking up at Wang. Then he returned to his calculations. Wang Miao was seized by a nameless terror. He shouted,
Don't do this! Let me go! I'm telling the truth! If you're telling the truth, then you won't be burnt to death. The game rewards those who are on the right path.
As Aristotle grinned, he took out a silver Zippo lighter, flipped it in his hand in a complicated fashion, and then flicked it on. As he was about to light the firewood piled around Wang, a bright red light filled the entrance tunnel, followed by a wave of heat and smoke. A horse dashed out of the light and into the great hall. Its body was already on fire, and as it galloped, the wind whipped it into a ball of flames. The rider, a knight in heavy armor that glowed red from the heat, dragged a line of white smoke behind him.
The world has ended! The world has ended! Dehydrate! Dehydrate!
As the knight shouted, the animal under him fell down and turned into a bonfire. The knight was thrown some distance and rolled all the way to the stake, where he stopped moving. White smoke continued to pour out of openings in the armor. The sizzling grease from the dead man inside oozed out on the ground and caught fire, giving the armor a pair of burning wings. Everyone in the great hall streamed toward the entrance tunnel and squeezed into it, disappearing in the red light from outside. Wang Miao struggled with all his strength until he was freed from the ropes. He dodged the burning knight and horse, dashed through the empty great hall, and ran down the sweltering tunnel until he emerged outside. The ground glowed red like a piece of iron in a blacksmith's furnace. Bright rivulets of lava snaked across the dim red earth, forming a net of fire that stretched to the horizon. Countless thin pillars of flame erupted toward the sky. The dehydratories were burning. The dehydrated bodies inside gave the fire a strange, bluish glow. Not far from him, Wang saw a dozen or so small pillars of flame of the same color. These were the people who had just run out of the pyramid: the Pope, Galileo, Aristotle, and Leonardo. The fiery pillars around them were translucent blue, and he could see their faces and bodies slowly deforming in the flame. They focused their gazes on Wang, who had just emerged. Holding the same pose and lifting their arms toward the sky, they chanted in unison, "Tri-Solar Day!" Wang looked up and saw 3 gigantic suns slowly spinning around an invisible origin, like an immense 3-bladed fan blowing a deadly wind toward the world below. The 3 suns took up almost the entire sky, and as they drifted toward the west, half of the formation sank below the horizon. The giant fan continued to spin, a bright blade occasionally shooting above the horizon to give the dying world another brief sunrise and sunset. After a sunset, the ground glowed dim red, and the sunrise a moment later flooded everything with its glaring parallel rays. Once the 3 suns had completely set, the thick clouds that had formed from all the evaporated water still reflected their glow. The sky burned, displaying a hellish, maddening beauty. After the last light of destruction finally disappeared, and the clouds only glowed with a faint red luminescence reflected from the hellish fire on the ground, a few lines of giant text appeared. Civilization number 183 was destroyed by a tri-solar day. This civilization had advanced to the Middle Ages. After a long time, life and civilization will begin again, and progress once more through the unpredictable world of 3body. But in this civilization, Copernicus successfully revealed the basic structure of the universe. The civilization of 3body will take its first leap. The game has now entered the second level. We invite you to log on to the second level of 3body. 16. The 3body problem. As soon as Wang logged out of the game, the phone rang. It was Shi Qiang, who said it was urgent that he come down to Shi's office at the criminal division. Wang glanced at his watch. It was 3 a.m. Wang arrived at Da Shi's chaotic office and saw that it was already filled with a dense cloud of cigarette smoke. A young woman police officer who shared the office fanned the smoke away from her nose with a notebook. Da Shi introduced her as Xu Bingbing, a computer specialist from the Information Security Division. The third person in the office surprised Wang. It was Wei Cheng, the reclusive, mysterious husband of Shen Yufei from the Frontiers of Science. Wei's hair was a mess. He looked up at Wang, but seemed to have forgotten they had met.
"I'm sorry to bother you, but at least it looks like you weren't asleep," Da Shi said. "I have to deal with something that I haven't told the Battle Command Center yet, and I need your advice." He turned to Wei Cheng. "Tell him what you told me."
"My life is in danger," Wei said, his face wooden.
"Why don't you start from the beginning?"
"Fine.
I will. Don't complain about me being long-winded. Actually, I've often thought about talking to someone lately.
Wei turned to look at Shu Bingbing.
Don't you need to take notes or something?
Not right now,
Da Shi said, not missing a beat.
You didn't have anyone to talk to before?
No, that's not it. I was too lazy to talk. I've always been lazy.
Wei Chang's story.
I've been lackadaisical since I was a kid. When I lived at boarding school, I never washed the dishes or made the bed. I never got excited about anything. Too lazy to study, too lazy to even play. I dawdled my way through the days without any clear goals. But I knew that I had some special talents others lacked. For example, if you drew a line, I could always draw another line that would divide it into the golden ratio, 1.618. My classmates told me that I should be a carpenter, but I thought it was more than that, a kind of intuition about numbers and shapes. But my math grades were just as bad as my grades in other classes. I was too lazy to bother showing my work. On tests, I just wrote out my guesses as answers. I got them right about 80 to 90% of the time, but I still got mediocre scores. When I was a second-year student in high school, a math teacher noticed me. Back then, many high school teachers had impressive academic credentials, because during the Cultural Revolution, many talented scholars ended up teaching in high schools. My teacher was like that. One day, he kept me after class. He wrote out a dozen or so numerical sequences on the blackboard and asked me to write out the summation formula for each. I wrote out the formulas for some of them almost instantaneously, and could tell at a glance that the rest of them were divergent. My teacher took out a book, The Collected Cases of Sherlock Holmes. He turned to one story, A Study in Scarlet, I think. There's a scene in it where Watson sees a plainly dressed messenger downstairs and points him out to Holmes. Holmes says, "Oh, you mean the retired sergeant of Marines?" Watson is amazed by how Holmes could deduce the man's history. But Holmes can't articulate his reasoning and has to think for a while to figure out his chain of deductions. It was based on the man's hand, his movements, and so on. He tells Watson that there's nothing strange about this. Most people would have difficulty explaining how they know 2 and 2 make 4. My teacher closed the book and said to me, "You're just like that. Your derivation is so fast and instinctive that you can't even tell how you got the answer." Then he asked me, "When you see a string of numbers, what do you feel?" "I'm talking about feelings." I said, "Any combination of numbers appears to me as a three-dimensional shape. Of course, I can't describe the shapes of numbers, but they really do appear as shapes." "Then what about when you see geometric figures?" the teacher asked. I said, "It's just the opposite. In my mind, there are no geometric figures. Everything turns into numbers. It's just like if you get really close to a picture in the newspaper and everything turns into little dots." The teacher said, "You really have a natural gift for math, but, he added a few more buts, pacing back and forth as though I was a difficult problem that he didn't know how to handle. "But people like you don't cherish your gift." After thinking for a while, he seemed to give up, saying, "Why don't you sign up for the district math competition next month? I'm not going to tutor you. I'd just be wasting my time with your sort. But when you give your answers, make sure to write out your derivations." So, I went to the competition. From the district level up through the International Mathematics Olympiad in Budapest. I won first place each time. After I got back, I was accepted by a top college's math program without having to go through the entrance examination. You're not bored by my talking all this time? Good. Well, to make sense of what happened later, I have to tell you all this. That high school math teacher was right. I didn't cherish my talent. Bachelor's, master's, PhD. I never put much effort into any of them. But I did manage to get through them all. However, once I graduated and went back to the real world, I realized that I was completely useless. Other than math, I knew nothing. I was half asleep when it came to the complexities of relationships between people. The longer I worked, the worse my career.
Eventually, I became a lecturer at a college, but I couldn't survive there either. I just couldn't take teaching seriously. I'd write on the blackboard easy to prove, and my students would still struggle for a long while. Later, when they began to eliminate the worst teachers, I was fired. By then, I was sick of everything. I packed a bag and went to a Buddhist temple deep in the mountains, somewhere in southern China. Oh, I didn't go to become a monk. Too lazy for that. I just wanted to find a truly peaceful place to live for a while. The abbot there was my father's old friend, very intellectual, but became a monk in his old age. The way my father told it, at his level, this was about the only way out. The abbot asked me to stay. I told him I want to find a peaceful, easy way to just muddle through the rest of my life. The abbot said, "This place isn't really peaceful. There are a lot of tourists, and many pilgrims, too. The truly peaceful can find peace in a bustling city, and to attain that state, you need to empty yourself." I said, "I'm empty enough. Fame and fortune are nothing to me. Many of the monks in this temple are worldlier than me." The abbot shook his head and said, "No, emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is a type of existence. You must use this existential emptiness to fill yourself." His words were very enlightening to me. Later, after I thought about it a bit, I realized that it wasn't Buddhist philosophy at all, but was more akin to some modern physics theories. The abbot also told me he wasn't going to discuss Buddhism with me. His reason was the same as my high school teachers. With my sort, he'd just be wasting his time. That first night, I couldn't sleep in the tiny room in the temple. I didn't realize that this refuge from the world would be so uncomfortable. My blanket and sheet both became damp in the mountain fog, and the bed was so hard. In order to make myself sleep, I tried to follow the abbot's advice and fill myself with emptiness. In my mind, the first emptiness I created was the infinity of space. There was nothing in it, not even light. But soon I knew that this empty universe could not make me feel peace. Instead, it filled me with a nameless anxiety, like a drowning man wanting to grab onto anything at hand. So I created a sphere in this infinite space for myself. Not too big, though possessing mass. My mental state didn't improve, however. The sphere floated in the middle of emptiness. In infinite space, anywhere could be the middle. The universe had nothing that could act on it, and it could act on nothing. It hung there, never moving, never changing, like a perfect interpretation for death. I created a second sphere whose mass was equal to the first one's. Both had perfectly reflective surfaces. They reflected each other's images, displaying the only existence in the universe other than itself. But the situation didn't improve much. If the spheres had no initial movement, that is, if I didn't push them at first, they would be quickly pulled together by their own gravitational attraction. Then the two spheres would stay together and hang there without moving, a symbol for death. If they did have initial movement and didn't collide, then they would revolve around each other under the influence of gravity. No matter what the initial conditions, the revolutions would eventually stabilize and become unchanging, the dance of death. I then introduced a third sphere, and to my astonishment, the situation changed completely. Like I said, any geometric figure turns into numbers in the depths of my mind. The sphereless one-sphere and two-sphere universes all showed up as a single equation, or a few equations, like a few lonesome leaves in late fall. But this third sphere gave emptiness life. The three spheres, given initial movements, went through complex, seemingly never-repeating movements. The descriptive equations rained down in a thunderstorm without end. Just like that, I fell asleep. The three spheres continued to dance in my dream, a patternless, never-repeating dance. Yet, in the depths of my mind, the dance did possess a rhythm. It was just that its period of repetition was infinitely long. This mesmerized me. I wanted to describe the whole period, or at least a part of it. The next day I kept on thinking about the three spheres dancing in emptiness. My attention had never been so completely engaged. It got to the point where one of the monks asked the abbot whether I was having mental health issues. The abbot laughed and said, "Don't worry, he has found emptiness." Yes, I had found emptiness. Now I could be at peace in a bustling city. Even in the midst of a noisy crowd, my heart would be completely tranquil. For the first time, I enjoyed math. I felt like a libertine who's always fluttered carelessly from one woman to another, suddenly finding himself in love. The physics principles behind the three-body problem are very simple. It's mainly a math problem.
Didn't you know about Henri Poincaré?
Wang Miao interrupted Wei to ask. At the time, I didn't. Yes, I know that someone studying math should know about a master like Poincaré, but I didn't worship masters. I didn't want to become one, so I didn't know his work. But even if I had, I would have continued to pursue the three-body problem. Everyone seems to believe that Poincaré proved that the three-body problem couldn't be solved, but I think they're mistaken. He only proved sensitive dependence on initial conditions, and that the three-body system couldn't be solved by integrals. But sensitivity is not the same as being completely indeterminable. It's just that the solution contains a greater number of different forms. What's needed is a new algorithm. Back then, I thought of one thing. Have you heard of the Monte Carlo method? It's a computer algorithm often used for calculating the area of irregular shapes. Specifically, the software puts the figure of interest in a figure of known area, such as a circle, and randomly strikes it with many tiny balls, never targeting the same spot twice. After a large number of balls, the proportion of balls that fall within the irregular shape compared to the total number of balls used to hit the circle will yield the area of the shape. Of course, the smaller the balls used, the more accurate the result. Although the method is simple, it shows how mathematically random brute force can overcome precise logic. It's a numerical approach that uses quantity to derive quality. This is my strategy for solving the three-body problem. I study the system moment by moment. At each moment, the sphere's motion vectors can combine in infinite ways. I treat each combination like a life form. The key is to set up some rules. Which combinations of motion vectors are healthy and beneficial, and which combinations are detrimental and harmful. The former receive a survival advantage, while the latter are disfavored. The computation proceeds by eliminating the disadvantaged and preserving the advantaged. The final combination that survives is the correct prediction for the system's next configuration, the next moment in time.
It's an evolutionary algorithm,
Wang said.
It's a good thing I invited you along.
Shiqiang nodded at Wang. Yes, only much later did I learn that term. The distinguishing feature of this algorithm is that it requires ultra-large amounts of computing power. For the three-body problem, the computers we have now aren't enough. Back then, in the temple, I didn't even have a calculator. I had to go to the accounting office to get a blank ledger and a pencil. I began to build the math model on paper. This required a lot of work, and in no time at all, I went through more than a dozen ledgers. The monks in charge of accounts were angry with me, but because the abbot wished it, they found me more paper and pen. I hid the completed calculations under my pillow and threw the scratch paper into the incense burner in the yard. One evening, a young woman suddenly dashed into my room. This was the first time a woman had shown up at my place. She clutched a few pieces of paper with burnt edges, the scratch paper I'd thrown out. "They tell me these are yours. Are you studying the three-body problem?" Behind her wide glasses, her eyes seemed to be on fire. The woman surprised me. The math I used was unconventional, and my derivations took large leaps, but the fact that she could tell the subject of my study from a few pieces of scratch paper showed that she had unusual math talent, and that she, like me, was very devoted to the three-body problem. I didn't have a good impression of the tourists and pilgrims. The tourists had no idea what they were looking at, only running around to snap pictures. As for the pilgrims, they looked much poorer than the tourists, and all seemed to be in a state of numbness, their intellect inhibited. But this woman was different. She looked like an academic. Later I found out that she'd come with a group of Japanese tourists. Without waiting for my answer, she added, "Your approach is brilliant. We've been searching for a method like this that could turn the difficulty of the three-body problem into a matter of massive computation. Of course, it would require a very powerful computer." I told her the truth. Even if we were to use all the computers in the world, it wouldn't be enough. "But you must have an adequate research environment, and there's nothing like that here. I can give you the use of a supercomputer. I can also give you a mini-computer. Let's leave together tomorrow morning." The woman, of course, was Shen Yufei. Like now, she was concise and authoritarian, but she was more attractive then. I'm naturally a cold person. I had less interest in women than the monks around me. This woman, who didn't adhere to conventional ideas about femininity, was different, though. She attracted me. Since I had nothing to do anyway, I agreed right away. That night I couldn't sleep. I draped a shirt over my shoulders and walked out into the yard. In the distance, I saw Shen in the dim temple hall. She knelt before the Buddha with lit joss sticks, and all her movements seemed full of piety. I approached noiselessly, and as I came by the door to the temple hall, I heard her whisper a prayer. "Buddha, please help my Lord break away from the sea of misery." I thought I must have heard wrong, but she chanted the prayer again. "Buddha, please help my Lord break away from the sea of misery." I didn't understand religion and had no interest in any of them, but I really couldn't think of any prayer odder than this one. "What are you saying?" I blurted. Shen ignored me. She kept her eyes barely closed, her hands clasped together in front of her, as though watching her prayer rise with the incense smoke toward the Buddha. After a long while, she finally opened her eyes and turned toward me. "Go to sleep. We have to get up early." She didn't even look at me. "This Lord you mentioned, is he part of Buddhism?" I asked. "No." "Then—" Shen said nothing, just hurried away. I didn't get a chance to ask anything else. I repeated the prayer to myself over and over, and it seemed to grow even stranger. Eventually, I became frightened. I rushed over to the abbot's room and knocked on his door. What does it mean if someone prays to the Buddha to help another Lord? I then told him the details of what I saw. The abbot silently looked at the book in his hand, but he was thinking about what I said, not reading. Then he said, "Please leave me for a bit. Let me think." I turned and left, knowing that it was unusual. The abbot was very learned. Usually he could answer any question about religion, history, and culture without having to think. I waited outside the door for about the time it took to smoke a cigarette, and the abbot called for me. "I think there's only one possibility." His expression was grim. "What? What could it be? Could there be some religion whose god needs worshippers to pray to the gods of other religions to save it? Her Lord really exists." This response confused me. "Then the Buddha doesn't exist?" As soon as I said it, I realized how rude it sounded. I apologized. The abbot slowly waved his hand at me. "I told you, the two of us can't talk about Buddhism. The existence of the Buddha is a kind of existence that you cannot comprehend, but the Lord she's talking about exists in a way that you can understand. I can say no more concerning this matter. All I can do is counsel you against leaving with her. Why? It's just a feeling. I feel that behind her are things that you and I cannot imagine. I left the abbot's room and walked through the temple toward my room. The night had a full moon. I looked up at it and thought it a silvery, strange eye that gazed down at me, the light suffused with an eerie chill. The next day I did leave with Shen. I couldn't stay in the temple the rest of my life, after all. But I didn't think that over the next few years I would live the life of my dreams. Shen fulfilled her promise. I had a mini-computer and a comfortable environment. I even left the country several times to use supercomputers. Not time-sharing, but having the whole CPU to myself. She had a lot of money, though I didn't know where it came from. Later, we got married. There wasn't much love or passion, just mutual convenience. We both had things we wanted to get done. As for me, the few years after that could be described as a single day. My time passed peacefully. In her house I was taken care of and did not have to worry about food or clothing, so that I could devote myself to the study of the three-body problem. Shen never interfered with my life. The garage had a car that I could drive anywhere. I'm sure she wouldn't even have minded if I brought another woman home. She only paid attention to my research, and the only thing we talked about day to day was the three-body problem.
Do you know what else Shen has been up to?
Shi asked. Just the frontiers of science. She's busy with it all the time. Lots of people show up every day.
She didn't ask you to join?
Never. She never even talks to me about it. I don't care either. It's just the way I am. I don't want to care about anything. She knows it and says I'm an indolent man without any sense of purpose. The organization doesn't suit me and would interfere with my research.
Have you made any progress with the three-body problem?
Wang asked. Compared with the general state of the field, my progress could be said to be a breakthrough. Some years ago, Richard Montgomery of UCSC and Alain Chensier of Université Paris Diderot discovered another stable periodic solution to the three-body problem. Under appropriate initial conditions, the three bodies will chase each other around a fixed figure-8 curve. After that, everyone was keen to find such special, stable configurations, and every discovery was greeted with joy. Only 3 or 4 such configurations have been found so far. But my evolutionary algorithm has already discovered more than 100 stable configurations. Drawings of their orbits would fill a gallery with postmodern art. But that's not my goal. The real solution to the three-body problem is to build a mathematical model so that, given any initial configuration with known vectors, the model can predict all subsequent motion of the three-body system. This is also what Shen Yufei craves. But my peaceful life ended yesterday.
This is the crime you're reporting?
Shi asked. Yes. A man called yesterday and told me that if I didn't cease my research, I would be killed.
Who was he?
I don't know.
Phone number?
Don't know. Caller ID showed nothing.
Anything related to report?
Don't know. Da Shi laughed and tossed his cigarette butt into an ashtray.
You went on and on forever, and in the end, all you have to report is one line and a few I don't knows.
If I hadn't gone on like that, would you have understood the import of that call? Also, if that were all, I wouldn't have come here. I'm lazy, remember? But there was another thing. It was the middle of the night. I don't know if it was today or yesterday, and I was in bed. As I was drifting halfway between sleep and wakefulness, I felt something cold moving on my face. I opened my eyes and saw Shen Yufei, and I almost died of fright.
What's so frightening about seeing your wife in the middle of the night?
She stared at me in a way that I'd never seen. The light from outside fell on her face, and she looked like a ghost. She held something in her hand. A gun. Moving the barrel over my face, she told me that I had to continue working on the three-body problem. Otherwise, she'd kill me.
Oh, now this is getting interesting.
Da Shi gave a satisfied nod. He lit another cigarette. Interesting? Look, I've nowhere to go. That's why I came to you.
Tell us exactly what she said.
She said, if you succeed in solving the three-body problem, you will be the savior of the world. If you stop now, you'll be a sinner. If someone were to save or destroy the human race, then your possible contribution or sin would be exactly twice as much as his. Da Shi blew out a thick cloud of smoke and stared at Wei Cheng until he squirmed. He pulled a notepad out of the mess on his desk and picked up a pen.
You wanted us to take notes, right? Repeat what you just said.
Wei did. Wang said,
What she said is indeed strange. What does she mean by exactly twice as much?
Wei blinked. This seems pretty serious. When I came, the officer on duty immediately sent me to see you. It looks like you've already been paying attention to Shen and me. Da Shi nodded.
Let me ask you something else. Do you think the gun your wife held was real?
He saw that Wei didn't know how to answer.
Could you smell gun oil?
Yes, there was definitely an oily smell.
Good.
Da Shi, who had been sitting on his desk, jumped off.
Finally, we have an opening. Suspected illegal possession of firearms is enough to justify a search. I'll leave the paperwork until tomorrow, because we have to move right away.
He turned to Wang.
No rest for the weary. I have to ask you to come and advise me some more.
Then he turned to Xu Bingbing, who'd been silent the whole time.
Bang Bang, right now I have only 2 men on duty, and that's not enough. I know the Information Security Division isn't used to field work, but I need you to come along.
Xu nodded, glad to leave the smoke-filled office. In addition to Da Shi and Xu, the team for conducting the search consisted of Wang Miao, Wei Cheng, and 2 other officers from the criminal division. The 6 of them rode through the pre-dawn darkness in 2 police cars, heading toward Wei's neighborhood at the edge of the city. Xu and Wang were in the back seat. As soon as the car started, she whispered to Wang,
Professor Wang, your reputation in 3-body is very high. Somebody mentioned 3-body in the real world.
Wang was excited, right away feeling close to this young woman in a police uniform.
Do you play? I'm responsible for monitoring and tracking it. An unpleasant task.
Wang anxiously asked,
Can you tell me its background? I really want to know.
In the faint light coming through the car window, Wang saw Xu give a mysterious smile.
We want to know as well. But all its servers are outside the country. The system and firewall are very secure and hard to penetrate. We don't know much, but we can be sure it's not operated for profit. The software quality is uncommonly high, and the amount of information contained in it even more unusual. It doesn't even seem like a game. Have there been any—
Wang carefully picked the right words.
Supernatural signs?
Wang's night had been filled with coincidences. He had been called in to discuss the 3-body problem with Wei Cheng immediately after he solved the 3-body game. And now Xu was telling him she was monitoring the game. Something didn't seem right.
We don't think so. Many from all around the world participate in the game's development. Their collaboration methods seem similar to popular open-source practices, like the kind used to make the Linux operating system. but they're definitely using some very advanced development tools. As for the content of the game, who knows where they're getting it? It does seem a bit supernatural, like you said. However, we still believe in Captain Shu's famous rule. All this must be the work of people. Our tracking efforts are effective, and we'll have results soon.
The young woman was not experienced in lying, and her last remark made Wang realize that she was hiding much of the truth from him.
His rule is famous now?
Wang looked at Da Shi, who was in the driver's seat. When they reached the house, the sun had not yet risen. It was about the same time of night that Wang had seen Shen playing 3body. A second-story window was lit, but all the other windows were dark. As soon as Wang got out of the car, he heard noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like something was slapping against the wall. Da Shi, who had just gotten out of the car himself, immediately became alert. He kicked open the yard gate and rushed into the house with an agility surprising for his burly frame, his 3 colleagues close behind. Wang and Wei followed them into the house. They went upstairs and entered the room with a light on, their shoes splashing in a pool of blood. Shen lay in the middle of the room, blood still oozing from 2 bullet wounds in her chest. A third bullet had gone through her left brow, causing her whole face to be covered in red. Not far from her, a gun lay in a crimson pool. As Wang entered, Da Shi and one of the other officers rushed out and entered the dark room across the hall. The window there was open, and Wang heard the sound of a car starting outside. A male police officer began to make a phone call. Xu Bingbing stood a little ways apart, watching anxiously. She, like Wang and the others, had probably never seen a scene like this. A moment later, Da Shi returned. He put his gun back in its holster and said to the officer holding the phone,
"A black Volkswagen Santana with only 1 man. I couldn't get the license plate number. Tell him to block all entrances to the 5th Ring Road. Shit, he might actually get away."
Da Shi looked around and saw the bullet holes in the wall. He glanced at the shell casings scattered on the ground and added,
"The man got off 5 shots, and 3 hit her. She shot twice, both misses."
Then he crouched down to examine the body with the other officer. Xu stood farther away, stealing a glance at Wei Cheng next to her. Da Shi also looked up at him. On Wei's face was a trace of shock and a trace of sorrow, but only a trace. His usual wooden expression didn't break. He was far calmer than Wang.
"You don't seem bothered by this," Da Shi said to Wei. "They probably came to kill you."
Wei gave a ghastly grin.
"What can I do? Even now, I still don't know anything about her. I've told her many times to keep life simple. I'm thinking of the abbot's counsel to me that night. But, Da Shi stood up and walked over to stand in front of Wei. He took out a cigarette and lit it.
"I think you still have some things you haven't told us."
Oh, some things I was too lazy to talk about.
"Then you'd better work harder now."
Wei thought for a moment and said,
Yesterday afternoon, she argued with a man in the living room. It's that Pan Han, the famous environmentalist. They had argued a few times before, in Japanese, as though afraid to have me listen in. But yesterday they didn't care at all and argued in Chinese. I overheard a few snatches."
"Try to tell us exactly what you heard."
"Fine." Pan Han said, "Although we seem like fellow travelers on the surface, in reality we're irreconcilable enemies." Shen said, "Yes, you're trying to use our Lord's power against the human race." Pan said, "Your understanding is not completely unreasonable. We want our Lord to come to this world to punish those who've long deserved it. However, you're working to prevent our Lord's coming, and that's why we can't tolerate you. If you don't stop, we'll make you stop." Shen said, "The commander was blind to allow you to join the organization," Pan said. Speaking of, can you tell whether the commander sides with the Adventists or the Redemptionists? Does the commander want humanity eliminated or saved? Pan's words briefly silenced Shen, and the two didn't argue so loudly anymore. I couldn't hear anything else.
What did the man who threatened you on the phone sound like?
You're asking if he sounded like Pan Han? I don't know. He was speaking very softly, and I couldn't tell. Several more police cars arrived, sirens blaring. A group of white-gloved policemen came upstairs with cameras, and the house hummed with activity. Dasha told Wong to go back and get some rest. Instead, Wong walked into the room with the mini-computer to find Wei.
Can you give me an outline of your three-body evolutionary algorithm? I want to introduce it to some people. I know my request is abrupt. If you can't, don't worry about it.
Wei took out a CD and handed it to Wong. It's all on here. The whole model and additional documentation. Do me a favor and publish it under your own name. That would be a big help.
No, how could I do that?
Wei pointed at the disc in Wong's hand and said, Professor Wong, I noticed you the first time you came here. You're a good man, a man with a sense of responsibility. That's why I'm counseling you to stay away from this. The world is about to change. Everyone should try to live out the rest of their lives in peace. That would be best. Don't worry too much about other matters. It's all useless anyway.
You seem to know even more than you let on.
I spent every day with her. It's impossible to have no inkling.
Then why not tell the police?
Wei smiled contemptuously. The police are worthless. Even if God were here, it wouldn't do any good. The entire human race has reached the point where no one is listening to their prayers. Wei was standing next to an east-facing window. Through the glass, beyond the distant cityscape, the sky was brightening with the first light of dawn. For some reason, the light reminded Wong of the strange dawn he saw each time he logged on to 3body. In reality, I'm not so detached. I haven't been able to sleep the last few nights. Every morning when I see the sunrise, it feels like sunset. He turned to Wong, and after a long pause, added, And it's all because God, or the Lord she talked about, can't even protect himself anymore. 17. 3body, Newton, von Neumann, the first emperor, and trisolar syzygy. The start of the second level of 3body wasn't too different than the first. Still the strange cold dawn, still that colossal pyramid, but this time the pyramid was back in the Egyptian style. Wong heard the crisp sound of metal striking against metal. The clashing only highlighted the silence of the chilly dawn. Searching for the source, he saw two dark shadows flickering at the foot of the pyramid. In the dim light, metallic glints flashed between the shadows. A sword fight. Once his eyes had adjusted, Wong saw the figures more clearly. Based on the shape of the pyramid, this should be someplace in 3body's version of the East, but the two fighters were Europeans, dressed in a 16th or 17th century style. The shorter one ducked below a swinging sword, and his silvery wig fell to the ground. After a few more thrusts and parries, another man appeared around the corner of the pyramid and ran toward the fighters. He tried to get the two to stop, but the swinging blades whistling through the air prevented him from getting close. He shouted,
Stop! Don't you two have anything better to do? Where's your sense of responsibility? If civilization has no future, what good is this supposed bit of glory you're fighting over?
Both sword fighters ignored him, concentrating on the duel. The taller one suddenly cried out in pain, and his sword fell to the ground with a clang. He turned and ran, holding his wounded arm. The other gave chase for a few steps and spat in the direction of the loser.
Shameless.
He bent down to pick up his wig. As he straightened up, he saw Wong. Pointing in the direction of the escapee, he said,
"He dared to claim that he invented calculus."
He put on his wig, put a hand over his heart, and bowed courteously to Wong.
"Isaac Newton, at your service."
"Then the one who ran away must be Leibniz?"
Wong asked.
"Indeed, an unscrupulous man. I don't really care about this little claim to fame. Inventing the 3 laws of mechanics has already made me the greatest, God accepted. From planetary motion to cell division, everything follows the 3 great laws.
Now, with a powerful mathematical tool that is calculus,
it'll only be a matter of time before we master the pattern of the motion of the 3 suns."
"It's not that simple,"
said the man who had tried to stop the fight.
"Have you considered the amount of calculation that's needed? I saw the differential equations you listed, and I don't think any analytical solution is possible. Only a numerical one. However, the calculating capacity required is such that even if all of the world's mathematicians worked without pause, they'd still not be able to complete them by the time the world ended. Of course, if we can't figure out the pattern of the sun's movement soon, the end of the world will not be too far away."
He bowed at Wong as well, a more modern bow.
"Von Neumann."
"Didn't you bring us thousands of miles to the east specifically to solve the problem of calculating these equations?"
Newton asked. Then he turned to Wong.
"Norbert Wiener and that degenerate who just ran away also came with us. We encountered some pirates near Madagascar. Wiener fought the pirates by himself so that the rest of us could escape, and he died valiantly."
"Why did you have to come to the east to build a computer?"
Wong asked von Neumann. Von Neumann and Newton looked at each other, puzzled.
"A computer? A computing machine? Such a thing exists?" "You don't know about computers? Then what did you have in mind for completing the vast amount of calculations?"
Von Neumann stared at Wong with wide-open eyes, as though his question made no sense.
"Using people, of course. Other than people, what else in the world is capable of performing calculations?" "But you just said that all the mathematicians in the world wouldn't be enough." "Instead of mathematicians, we'll use common laborers. But we need many of them, at least 30 million. We'll do mathematics using human wave tactics."
Common laborers. 30 million? Wong was amazed.
"But if I recall correctly, this is an age when 90% of the population are illiterate. Yet you want to find 30 million people who understand calculus?" "Have you heard the joke about the army of Sichuan?"
Von Neumann took out a thick cigar, bit off the end, and lit it.
"Sub-soldiers were being drilled, but because they had no education, they couldn't even follow the drill instructor's simple orders to march left, right, left. So the instructor came up with a solution. He had every soldier wear a straw shoe on the left foot and a cloth shoe on the right. When they marched, he shouted,"
here he switched to a Sichuan accent,
"Straw cloth, straw cloth. That's the kind of soldier we need. Except we need 30 million of them."
Hearing this modern joke, Wong knew that the man before him wasn't a program, but a real person, and almost certainly Chinese.
"It's hard to imagine such a large army,"
Wong said, shaking his head.
"That's why we've come to see Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor."
Newton pointed at the pyramid.
"He's still in charge?"
Wong looked around. He saw that the soldiers guarding the entrance to the pyramid really were equipped with the simple leather armor and Ji-style halberds of the Qin dynasty. The anachronistic mix of historical elements in 3body no longer surprised him.
"The whole world is going to be under his rule because he has an army of more than 30 million preparing to conquer Europe. All right, let's go see him."
Von Neumann turned to Newton.
"Drop the sword."
Newton obeyed. The three of them entered the pyramid, and just as they were about to emerge from the tunnel into the great hall, a guard insisted that they strip off all their clothes. Newton objected.
"We're famous scholars. No one of our stature would carry hidden weapons."
As the two sides explored this stalemate, a deep male voice came from the great hall.
"Is it the foreigner who discovered the 3 laws of motion? Let him and his companions in."
They entered the great hall. The first emperor was pacing back and forth, his robe and his famous longsword both dragging along the ground. As he turned to gaze at the 3 scholars, Wang realized that his eyes were the same as the eyes of King Zhou of Shang and Pope Gregory.
"I already know the purpose of your visit. You're Europeans. Why not go find Caesar? His empire is vast. Surely he can find you 30 million men."
But, my most honored emperor, do you know what kind of army he has? Do you know what shape his empire is in? In the magnificent eternal city of Rome, even the river that flows through the city has been heavily polluted. Do you know the cause?
Military-industrial production?
No, great emperor. It's the vomit from Romans after their binge and purge feasts. When the nobles attend the feasts, stretchers have already been prepared for them under the tables. When they've eaten so much that they can no longer move, the servants carry them home. The entire empire is sunk into a quagmire of extravagance from which they cannot extricate themselves. Even if Caesar could organize an army of 30 million, it would not have the quality and strength necessary to perform this great calculation.
"I am aware of that,"
Qin Shi Huang said.
"But Caesar is waking up and reinvigorating his army. The wisdom of Westerners is terrifying. You are not more intelligent than the men of the East, but you can see the right path. For example, Copernicus could figure out that there are 3 suns, and you could come up with your 3 laws. These are very impressive accomplishments. We here in the East cannot for now match them. I don't possess the ability to conquer Europe. My ships are not good enough, and the supply lines cannot be maintained for long enough to go over land."
That's why your empire must continue to develop, great emperor.
Von Neumann seized the opportunity.
If you can master the pattern of the sun's movements, you will be able to make the most of each stable era, and also avoid the damage brought by each chaotic era. This way, your progress will be much faster than Europe's. Believe us, we're scholars. As long as we can use the 3 laws of motion and calculus to accurately forecast the movements of the suns, we do not care who conquers the world.
Of course I need to predict the sun's movements. But if you want me to gather 30 million men, you must at least demonstrate for me how such calculations would be conducted.
Your Imperial Majesty, please give me 3 soldiers. I will demonstrate.
Von Neumann grew excited.
3? Only 3. I can easily give you 3,000.
Qin Shi Huang glanced at von Neumann, distrustful.
Your Imperial Majesty, you mentioned just now the defect in the Eastern mind when it comes to scientific thinking. This is because you have not realized that even the complicated objects of the universe are made from the simplest elements. I only need 3.
Qin Shi Huang waved his hand, and 3 soldiers came forward. They were all very young. Like other Qin soldiers, they moved like order-obeying machines.
I do not know your names,
von Neumann said, tapping the shoulders of 2 of the soldiers.
The 2 of you will be responsible for signal input, so I'll call you Input 1 and Input 2.
He pointed to the last soldier.
You will be responsible for signal output, so I'll call you Output.
He shoved the soldiers to where he wanted them to stand.
Form a triangle, like this. Output is the apex, Input 1 and Input 2 form the base.
You could have just told them to stand in the wedge attack formation,
Qin Shi Huang said, glancing at von Neumann contemptuously. Newton took out 6 small flags, 3 white, 3 black. Von Neumann handed them out to the 3 soldiers so that each held a black flag and a white flag.
White represents 0, black represents 1. Good. Now, listen to me. Output, you turn around and look at Input 1 and Input 2. If they both raise black flags, you raise a black flag as well.
Under all other circumstances, you raise the white flag.
I think you should use some other color, Qin Shi Huang said. White means surrender.
The excited von Neumann ignored him. He shouted orders at the 3 soldiers. Begin operation! Input 1 and input 2. You can raise whichever flag you want. Good. Raise! Good. Raise again. Raise! Input 1 and input 2 raised their flags 3 times. The first time they were black-black, the second time white-black, and the third time black-white. Output reacted correctly each time, raising the black flag once and the white one twice. Very good. Your Imperial Majesty, your soldiers are very smart.
Even an idiot would be capable of that. Tell me, what are they really doing?
Qin Shi Huang looked baffled. The 3 soldiers form a computing component. It's a type of gate, an AND gate. Von Neumann paused to let the Emperor digest this information. Qin Shi Huang said impassively,
I'm not impressed. Continue.
Von Neumann turned to the 3 soldiers again. Let's form another component. You, output. If you see either input 1 or input 2 raise a black flag, you raise the black flag. There are 3 situations where that will be true. Black-black, white-black, black-white. When it's white-white, you raise the white flag. Understand? Good lad. You're really clever. You're the key to the correct functioning of the gate. Work hard and the Emperor will reward you. Let's begin operation. Raise. Good. Raise again. Raise again. Perfect. Your Imperial Majesty, this component is called an OR gate. Then von Neumann used the 3 soldiers to form a NAND gate, a NOR gate, an XOR gate, an XNOR gate, and a tri-state gate. Finally, using only 2 soldiers, he made the simplest gate, a NOT gate, or an inverter. Output always raised the flag that was opposite in color from the one raised by input. Von Neumann bowed to the Emperor. Now, Your Imperial Majesty, all the gate components have been demonstrated. Aren't they simple? Any 3 soldiers can master the skills after 1 hour of training.
Don't they need to learn more? Qin Shi Huang asked.
No. We can form 10 million of these gates and then put the components together into a system. This system will then be able to carry out the calculations we need and work out those differential equations for predicting the sun's movements. We could call the system... a computer, Wang said. Ah! Good! Von Neumann gave Wang a thumbs up. Computer. That's a great name. The entire system is a large machine, the most complex machine in the history of the world. The passage of in-game time sped up. 3 months went by. Qin Shi Huang, Newton, von Neumann, and Wang all stood on the platform at the apex of the pyramid. This platform was similar to the one where Wang had met Mozi. It was filled with astronomical instruments, some of which were of recent European design. Below them, a magnificent phalanx of 30 million Qin soldiers was arrayed on the ground. The entire formation fit inside a square 6 kilometers on each side. As the sun rose, the phalanx remained still, like a giant carpet made of 30 million terracotta warriors. But when a flock of birds wandered above the phalanx, the birds immediately felt the potential for death from below and scattered anxiously in chaos. Wang performed some computations in his head and realized that even if the entire population of Earth were arranged into such a phalanx, the whole formation would fit inside the Huangpu district of Shanghai. Though it was powerful, the phalanx also revealed the fragility of civilization. Von Neumann said, "Your Imperial Majesty, your army is truly matchless. In an extremely short time, we have completed such complex training." Qin Shi Huang held on to the hilt of his longsword.
Even though the whole is complex, what each soldier must do is very simple. Compared to the training they went through to learn how to break the Macedonian phalanx, this is nothing.
Newton added,
"And God bless us with 2 consecutive stable eras to get 'em trained and ready."
Even in a chaotic era, my army continues to train. They will finish your calculations even if it's a chaotic era.
Qin Shi Huang glanced over the phalanx with pride in his eyes.
Then, Your Imperial Majesty, please give the great order.
Von Neumann's voice trembled with excitement. Qin Shi Huang nodded. A guard ran over, grabbed the hilt of the Emperor's sword, and stepped backwards. The bronze sword was so long that it was impossible for the Emperor himself to pull it out of the scabbard. The guard knelt and handed the sword to the Emperor. Qin Shi Huang lifted the sword to the sky and shouted, "Computer formation!" 4 giant bronze cauldrons at the corners of the platform came to life simultaneously with roaring flames. A group of soldiers standing on the sloping side of the pyramid, facing the phalanx, chanted in unison, "Computer formation!" On the ground below, colors in the phalanx began to shift and move. Complicated and detailed circuit patterns appeared and gradually filled the entire formation. 10 minutes later, the army had made a 36-kilometer square computer motherboard. Von Neumann pointed to the gigantic human circuit below the pyramid and began to explain.
Your Imperial Majesty, we have named this computer Qin 1. Look, there in the center is the CPU, the core computing component, formed from your 5 best divisions. By referencing this diagram, you can locate the adders, registers, and stack memory. The part around it that looks highly irregular is the memory. When we built that part, we found that we didn't have enough soldiers. But, luckily, the work done by the elements in this component is the simplest, so we trained each soldier to hold more colored flags. Each man can now complete the work that initially required 20 men. This allowed us to increase the memory capacity to meet the minimum requirements for running the Qin 1.0 operating system. Observe also the open passage that runs through the entire formation, and the light cavalry waiting for orders in that passage. That's the system bus, responsible for transmitting information between the components of the whole system. The bus architecture is a great invention. New plug-in components, which can be made from up to 10 divisions, can quickly be added to the main operation bus. This allows Qin 1's hardware to be easily expanded and upgraded. Look further still. You might have to use the telescope for this. And there's the external storage, which we call the hard drive, at Copernicus's suggestion. It's formed by 3 million soldiers with more education than most. When you buried all those scholars alive after you unified China, it's a good thing you saved these ones. Each of them holds a pen and a notepad, and they're responsible for recording the results of the calculations. Of course, the bulk of their work is to act as virtual memory and store intermediate calculation results. They're the bottleneck for the speed of computation. And, finally, the part that's closest to us is the display. It's capable of showing us in real time the most important parameters of the computation. Von Neumann and Newton carried over a large scroll, tall as a man, and spread it open before Qin Shi Huang. When they reached the scroll's end, Huang's chest tightened, remembering the legend of the assassin who hid a dagger in a map scroll that he then displayed to the Emperor. But the imaginary dagger did not appear. Before them was only a large sheet of paper filled with symbols, each the size of a fly's head. Packed so densely, the symbols were as dazzling to behold as the computer formation on the ground below. Your Imperial Majesty, this is the Qin 1.0 operating system we developed. The software for doing the calculations will run on top of it. That, below, Von Neumann pointed to the human formation computer, is the hardware. What's on this paper is the software. The relationship between hardware and software is like that between the Guqin zither and sheet music. He and Newton then spread open another scroll, just as large. Your Imperial Majesty, this is the software for using numerical methods to solve those differential equations. After entering the motion vectors of the 3 suns at a particular moment obtained by astronomical observation, the software's operation will give us a prediction for the sun's subsequent motion at any moment in the future. Our first computation will calculate all the sun's positions for the next 2 years. Each set of output values will be 120 hours apart.
Qin Shi Huang nodded.
Good. Begin.
Von Neumann lifted both hands above his head and solemnly chanted, "As ordered by the great Emperor, turn on the computer! System, self-test!" A row of soldiers standing halfway down the face of the pyramid repeated the order using flag signals. In a moment, the motherboard made of 30 million men seemed to turn into a lake filled with sparkling lights. Tens of millions of tiny flags waved. In the display formation closest to the base of the pyramid, a progress bar made of numerous green flags slowly advanced, indicating the percentage of the self-test that had been completed. 10 minutes later, the progress bar reached its end. "Self-test complete. Begin boot sequence. Load operating system." Below, the light cavalry on the main bus that passed through the entire human formation computer began to move swiftly. The main bus soon turned into a turbulent river. Along the way, the river fed into numerous thin tributaries, infiltrating all the modular subformations. Soon, the ripple of black and white flags coalesced into surging waves that filled the entire motherboard. The central CPU area was the most tumultuous, like gunpowder on fire. But suddenly, as though the powder had been exhausted, the movements in the CPU slackened and eventually stopped. Starting with the CPU in the center, the stillness spread in every direction, like a sea being frozen over. Finally, the entire motherboard came to a stop, with only a few scattered components flashing lifelessly in infinite loops. The center of the display formation blinked red.
"System lockup!"
A signal officer called out. Shortly after, the reason for the malfunction was determined. There was an error with the operation of one of the gates in the CPU status register. "Restart system," Von Neumann ordered confidently.
"Wait!"
Newton stopped the signal officer. He turned with an insidious expression and said to Qin Shi Huang,
"Your Imperial Majesty, in order to improve system stability, you should take certain maintenance measures with respect to faulty components."
Qin Shi Huang grasped his sword and said,
"Replace the malfunctioning component and behead all the soldiers who made up that gate. In the future, any malfunction will be dealt with the same way."
Von Neumann glanced at Newton, disgusted. They watched as a few riders dashed into the motherboard with their swords unsheathed. After they repaired the faulty component, the order to restart was given. This time, the operation went very smoothly. 20 minutes later, 3body's Von Neumann architecture human formation computer had begun full operations under the Qin 1.0 operating system. "Run solar orbit computation software, 3body 1.0, Newton screamed at the top of his lungs. "Start the master computing module! Load the differential calculus module! Load the finite element analysis module! Load the spectral method module! Enter initial condition parameters and begin calculation!" The motherboard sparkled as the display formation flashed with indicators in every color. The human formation computer began the long computation.
"This is really interesting,"
Qin Shi Huang said, pointing to the spectacular sight.
"Each individual's behavior is so simple, yet together they can produce such a complex great whole. Europeans criticize me for my tyrannical rule, claiming that I suppress creativity. But in reality, a large number of men yoked by severe discipline can also produce great wisdom when bound together as one."
"Great First Emperor, this is just the mechanical operation of a machine, not wisdom. Each of these lowly individuals is just a zero. Only when someone like you is added to the front as a one can the whole have any meaning."
Newton's smile was ingratiating. "Disgusting philosophy," Von Neumann said as he glanced at Newton. "If, in the end, the results computed in accordance with your theory and mathematical model don't match reality, then you and I aren't even zeros."
"Indeed. If that turns out to be the case, you will be nothing."
Qin Shi Huang turned and left the scene. Time passed quickly. The human formation computer operated for a year and 4 months. Subtracting out the time spent to adjust the programming, the actual processing time was approximately a year and 2 months. During this time, processing had to be stopped twice due to extremely bad weather in chaotic eras. But the computer stored the data at the time of each shutdown and was able to resume calculations successfully after the pauses. By the time Qin Shi Huang and the European scholars ascended the pyramid again, the first phase of the computation was complete. The results precisely described the orbits of the 3 suns for the next 2 years. It was a chilly dawn. The torches that had kept the motherboard lit through the night were extinguished. After the final calculation, Qin 1 entered standby mode. The turbulent waves over the motherboard settled into light ripples. Von Neumann and Newton presented the scroll with the results of the computation to Qin Shi Huang. Newton said,
"Great First Emperor, the calculations were completed 3 days ago. We waited until now to present the results to you because they show that the long night is about to be over. We'll soon welcome the first sunrise of a long, stable era, which will last more than a year. Judging by the orbital parameters, the climate will be extremely mild and comfortable. Please revive your empire and order everyone to be rehydrated."
Ever since the start of this computation, my empire has never been dehydrated,
Qin Shi Huang said in a huff, grabbing the scroll.
I've devoted all the resources of the Qin Empire to maintain the operation of the computer, and we've run out of stored supplies. For this computer, countless people have died of hunger, cold, and heat.
Qin pointed into the distance with the scroll. By the dim dawn light, they could see tens of white lines radiating from the edges of the motherboard in every direction, disappearing over the horizon. These were the supply routes from every corner of the empire.
"Your Imperial Majesty, you will find that the sacrifices are worth it," von Neumann said. "After mastering the orbits of the suns, Qin will develop by leaps and bounds and will grow many times more powerful than before."
"According to the calculations, the sun is about to rise. Great First Emperor, prepare to receive your glory."
As if in response to Newton's words, a sliver of red sun peeked over the horizon, bathing the pyramid and the human formation computer in a golden light. A wave of joyous cries rose from the motherboard. A man hurried toward them. He was running so fast that as he knelt down he couldn't catch his breath. He was the Emperor's astronomy minister.
"Sire, the calculations were in error. Disaster is about to befall us."
"What are you babbling about?"
Without even waiting for the Emperor to speak, Newton kicked the man.
"Don't you see that the sun is rising at the exact moment predicted by our precise calculations?"
The minister half straightened, one hand pointing at the sun.
"How many suns do you see?"
Everyone gazed at the rising sun, confused.
"Minister, you received a proper Western education and obtained a doctorate from the University of Cambridge," von Neumann said. "You must at least know how to count. Of course, there's only one sun in the sky, and the temperature is very comfortable."
"No, there are 3!"
the minister cried, tears flowing from his face.
"The other 2 are behind that one."
Everyone stared at the sun again, still confused.
"The Imperial Observatory has confirmed that right now we are experiencing the extremely rare phenomenon of a tri-solar syzygy. The 3 suns are in a straight line, moving around our planet at the same angular speed. Thus, our planet and the 3 suns are in a straight line, with our world at the end."
"You're certain that the observation is not in error?"
Newton grabbed the collar of the astronomy minister.
"Absolutely certain. The observation was conducted by the Western astronomers of the Imperial Observatory, including Kepler and Herschel. They're using the largest telescope in the world, imported from Europe."
Newton let go of the minister and stood up. Wang saw that his face was pale, but his expression was one of pure joy. He clasped his two hands in front of his chest and said to Qin Shi Huang,
"Oh, greatest, most honorable Emperor, this is the most propitious sign of them all. Now that the three suns are orbiting around our planet, your empire is the center of the universe. This is God's reward for our efforts. Let me check the calculations one more time. I will prove this."
While the rest remained stunned, Newton slipped away. Later, others would report that Sir Isaac had stolen a horse and left for parts unknown. An anxiety-filled moment of silence later, Wang suddenly said,
"Your Imperial Majesty, please unsheath your sword."
"What do you want?"
Qin Shi Huang asked, baffled. But he gestured at the soldier by his side, and the soldier pulled the sword out of its scabbard. Wang said,
"Please, try to swing it."
Qin Shi Huang held the sword and waved it around. His expression turned to one of surprise.
"Oh, why is it so light?"
"The game's V-suit cannot simulate the feeling of diminished gravity. Otherwise, we'd feel that we're much lighter as well."
"Look! Down there! Look at the horses! And the men!"
Someone cried out. Everyone looked down and saw a column of cavalry moving at the foot of the pyramid. All the horses seemed to be floating. Each horse drifted over a long distance before the four hooves struck ground again. They also saw several running men. With each step, the men leapt a dozen meters, falling slowly back to the ground. On top of the pyramid, a soldier tried to jump up and easily reached the height of 3 meters.
"What is going on?"
Qin Shi Huang looked at the soldier slowly falling back down.
"Sire, the three suns are over our planet in a straight line, so their gravitational forces are added together."
The astronomy minister tried to explain, but discovered that his 2 feet had already left the ground, and he was now horizontal. The others were also floating in the air, leaning at different angles. Like a bunch of men who had fallen into water without knowing how to swim, they clumsily waved their limbs, trying to stabilize themselves, but colliding into each other instead. The ground they had just left now cracked open like a spiderweb. The cracks grew fast, and accompanied by thunderous crashes and sky-obscuring dust, the pyramid below them broke into its constituent blocks. Through the slowly drifting gigantic blocks, Wang saw the great hall below come apart. The large cauldron that had once cooked Fu Si and the iron stake to which he had once been bound were both adrift. The sun rose to the middle of the sky. Everything that floated, men, colossal blocks of stone, astronomical instruments, bronze cauldrons, began to rise slowly, then accelerated. Wang glanced at the human formation computer and saw a nightmarish sight. The 30 million men who had formed the motherboard were floating away from the Earth and rising like a swarm of ants sucked up by a vacuum cleaner. The ground they left behind clearly displayed the marks of the motherboard circuits. The set of intricate, complex markings that could only be taken in from a great height would become an archaeological site that would confuse the next 3-body civilization in the distant future. Wang looked up. The sky was obscured by a strangely mottled layer of clouds. The clouds were made of dust, stones, humans, and other odds and ends. The sun sparkled behind them. In the far distance, Wang saw a long range of transparent mountains also rising up. The mountains were crystal clear and changed shapes as they sparkled. They were formed from the ocean, which was also being attracted into space. Everything on the surface of the 3-body world rose toward the sun. Wang looked around and saw von Neumann and Qin Shi Huang. As he drifted, von Neumann shouted at Qin Shi Huang, but there was no sound. A small set of subtitles appeared.
"I figured it out. Electronic elements. We can use electronic elements to make gate circuits and combine them into computers. Such computers will be many times faster and take up much less space. I estimate that a small building will be sufficient. Your Imperial Majesty, are you listening?"
Qin Shi Huang swung his long sword at von Neumann. The latter kicked at a giant block of stone drifting nearby and dodged out of the way. The long sword struck the stone, causing sparks to fly, and broke itself into 2 pieces. Right after, the giant block of stone collided with another, with Qin Shi Huang in the middle. Stone chips and flesh and blood scattered everywhere, an appalling sight. But Wang did not hear the noise made by colliding stones. Around him, it was completely silent. Because the atmosphere was gone, there was no more sound. As the bodies drifted, their blood boiled in the vacuum, and their inner organs were vomited out until they turned into strange blobs surrounded by crystalline clouds made from the liquid they exuded. Also, due to the lack of an atmosphere, the sky turned pitch black. Everything that had floated into space from the 3-body world reflected the sunlight and formed a brilliant, starry cloud in space. The cloud then turned into a giant vortex, spiraling toward its final resting place, the sun. Wang now saw the sun changing shape. He understood that he was actually seeing the other 2 suns, both peeking out from behind the first sun. From this perspective, the 3 stacked suns formed a bright eye in the universe. Against the background of the 3 suns in syzygy, text appeared. Civilization number 184 was destroyed by the stacked gravitational attractions of a trisolar syzygy. This civilization had advanced to the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. In this civilization, Newton established non-relativistic classical mechanics. At the same time, due to the invention of calculus and the von Neumann architecture computer, the foundation was set for the quantitative mathematical analysis of the motion of 3 bodies. After a long time, life and civilization will begin once more and progress through the unpredictable world of 3-body. We invite you to log on again. Just as Wang logged out of the game, a stranger called. The voice on the phone was that of a very charismatic man. "Hello! First, we thank you for giving us your real number. I'm a system administrator for the 3-body game." Wang was both excited and anxious. "Please, tell us your age, education, employer, and position. You didn't fill those out when you registered."
"What do they have to do with the game?"
"When you've reached this level, you must provide these pieces of information. If you refuse, 3-body will be permanently closed to you."
Wang answered the administrator's questions truthfully.
"Very good, Professor Wang. You satisfy the conditions for continuing in 3-body.
"Thank you. Can I ask you a few questions?"
"You may not, but tomorrow night there will be a meetup for 3-body players. We welcome you to attend."
The administrator gave Wang an address.